I have a problem. For the next 45 minutes, I have to engage a group of people who have ADD and keep you entertained. So let's see what I can do. With that said, I really am not a speaker. I'm an educator. I'm here today to give you some education in how not to get your butt kicked in court, how to avoid going to court, and how to deal with it. So let me start with this. I want to talk about that every single one of us has a target on our backs. It's called errors and omissions insurance. And since errors and omissions insurance has come out, more and more realtors are being sued. So let me start with a little story. It's a simple story. Once upon a time, I was going to start with a dark and dreary night, but once upon a time, there was a home. Now, this was a large rural home with about 15 acres. It was an odd number, 15 acres, long and narrow. And what happened to this home was very simple. At the back of this home, about a couple of acres behind, was a ravine that over the years got filled in with certain debris. Now, with this debris, what happened was the local town in the 60s tore down their town hall and said to the guy who owned it, "Fred, why don't we dump it in your old ravine there? And there's all other stuff there. It's got John Mansville asbestos siding. We'll just throw it in there and we'll reduce your taxes a little bit as being a good old boy." He said, "Sure, go ahead." And this is what the ravine ended up looking like. I won't get into all the story. Over the years, the ministry came along and they changed the standards and they said, you got to cover it up, you've got to do this, you got to do that. He tried to burn it at one time, but it was there and it was known to the Ministry of Environment. So one day, real estate agent, knock, knock, list the house, put it up for sale, and the agent, there's nothing, they don't know about this ravine, what's going on, it's all covered up in the back. They put it for sale, they sell it. There's a listing agent, there's a listing agent, there's a buyer's agent. But the Ministry of Environment guy one day is taking a drive. By the way, it's an absolute true story. I won't mention where it is because it's pending in the courts. One day, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Environment, probably all the same discipline, what can I tell you? They turn around, they're driving up, they see a sold sign. Picks up the telephone, this nice person from the ministry, and phones the agent and says, "Do you know about the contamination issue at this property?" And she goes, "Oh my God, I better phone the selling agent." And they get into this whole conversation. And these people are there and they decide what they should do. They actually meet for coffee to discuss this latest information. And they go and they say, what are we going to do with this information? What are we going to tell the buyer? And what do you think they did? They did nothing. Their commissions on a small property, maybe they were making, after splitting with their office or anything else, maybe they're making 5 bills a pop, maybe $5,000 each. And I sit back and I went, are you for real? I can't believe this. Why would you not disclose? So this is now pending and going to court. There may be somebody here that actually recognizes this case, so I gotta be a little careful because it hasn't come up yet. So the agents are like, oh, whoops, now we got sued. And the beauty of this whole thing is there's no whoops anymore, folks. Lawyers don't accept whoops. So here's what we have today. We have this thing called, well, I can't stand the sight of blood, so I'm going to become a lawyer. And what happens is we're graduating all these lawyers. Well, quite bluntly, we don't need all these lawyers in any province in Ontario and in Canada because of the simple fact there just are an awful lot of lawyers. And here is a nice picture of a graduating class of lawyers. I want you to get a different perspective of them. They don't care about us. They don't care. We're targets, folks, because this is all they see about us. This is how they see us. And get that through your head. I didn't even put this in my presentation. I'm sitting across Discovery. I'm being sued. I'm being sued by a guy who was one of my best friends growing up. He's a lawyer. He was also a mortgage lender. And after it was all over, 2 years later, I'm walking, it used to be Centro's, I'm in the restaurant, I'm sitting there, and I go, Michael, why did you sue me? He goes, I took a shot. You took a shot. 2 years it took me. 2 years to deal with his shot. The judge, nothing happened to me. I didn't even get my wrist slapped. But it was 2 years before it all disappeared. What a mess. Who needs it? So I'm not going to ask if anybody here has been sued. By the way, I'm going to try to do this so that I can open this up. Now, I want to ask a question so that I understand who's here. Ontario is easy. Who's from out of province here? Who in this room is from out of province? Anyone? Okay, that makes it a little easier for me. I'm here today because I have testified as a real estate professional under 5 disciplines in excess of 500 trials. A large percentage of the trials that I have dealt with have to deal with real estate agents being sued. As a matter of fact, the last 3-4 years, that's all I've been doing is litigation work before I decided to come back, and I was asked to come into RE/MAX. I am a RE/MAX broker, and I'm happy to be one. In the last 12 months, I've been back in RE/MAX. But I still have certain litigation files on my desk. With that said, some of you remember Eufy. How it all started with me was in 1981 when Eufy started to take off and the lawsuits came out like crazy. In the next 10 years, I opened over 1,000 files about urea formaldehyde insulation. And real estate agents were being sued because they should have known Eufy was in the house. Which brings me to another point, which I'll get to. With that said, I've spoken in front of the Law Society. I've been all over North America, Mexico, and what have you, Central America, speaking about different real estate topics to different real estate people, and it's all about disclosure. I've done disclosure work for agents, against agents, for agents in the Maritimes, in Ontario. I've done British Columbia, and I just finished a case in Saskatchewan, which was horrible because the people that bought the place were semi-illiterate. And it really got out of hand. It's going to be an interesting case. Now, with that said, I'm 46 years in real estate. This is all I've known my entire adult life. I have never had a paycheck. I do not understand a paycheck. And that's just the way it is. I sold the very first condo in the province of Ontario in 1968. I developed the first Chinese Plaza in Agincourt. I renovated. And some of you know me because I write for REM when I feel like it. And I'm also the founder of the Accredited Senior Agent Program, and now I'm proud to say I'm a RE/MAX broker. So with that said, that's why I go to court, because I do this for a living. Now, I don't like doing it for a living because sometimes I go against people who, bluntly, I know, and it's not always comfortable. So let's say this. You've got a buyer, and you're shopping for a house. I love that little one. I think that's so cute. Shopping for a house. And your question to you is, what should you know? Now, here's a real case. A real case. I got a guy. He travels across the city from his office in the East End. He goes all the way out to Woodbridge. And he sells his people a house. He's never been in the neighborhood. He goes off MLS. They're suing him because that buyer found out from a neighbor after they closed the house had been a grow-up. Now, really, how much do we have to know about a property? How can we protect ourselves, cover our butts, when we don't know the history of a house? I have a grow-up for sale right now. Yeah, but will you pay the price? What happens is, the grow-up that I have right now, oh, she brought me, this is my dear friend Michelle Sharp, and she's with Obio, and we joke because she buys me Apple products. She was giving away Apple products. You have to, it's a pun, it's a good pun. Okay, thank you for disrupting, no problem, anytime. No problems, guys. So with that said, Grow up. How would you know on MLS a house ever had been used for an illegal lab? It had been a meth lab. How would you know there's been a murder in the house? Okay, let's deal with this. 100,000 homes in Canada had urea formaldehyde. 100,000. Let's bear with me for the math. I wish I had a big thing here with math. 60,000 of those were probably in the province of Ontario, the majority around the Greater Toronto area. Let's go further. How many murders, and I have no idea the answer, have there been in Ontario from the beginning of recorded time? How many murders have we had? Hundreds? Thousands? How many houses are stigmatized because? How many meth labs? How many oil contaminations? And here's the beauty. It keeps building and building and building. In Ontario, there are hundreds of thousands of properties that are stigmatized properties. That's a reality check. So how do I, as a realtor, you as a realtor, know when you go to a property, the history of that property? By the way, somebody said to me, somebody jumped off the balcony, it was a suicide. I said, no, there wasn't. The death happened in the parking lot below. They didn't find apartments fine. Grow-ups. I love grow-ups. Grow-ups are kind of neat. So let me understand this. They're going to catch me after I've made $1 million cash. I'm going to go to 6 months in the joint, be somebody's bitch, walk out, got the cash, and I'm happy. Hey, it's not a bad deal. It's not a bad gig. So you can understand why so many people are in the grow-up business. Now, the grow-up business is bigger than you think. Here's what else has happened. You've got a client who owns a property, and that client rents out the property. And he gets a tenant. And he finds out the tenant has been running a grow-up or a meth lab or something. He doesn't phone the police. If he's smart, he goes and says to the people, I know what you're doing, get the hell out of there. And then they don't have to disclose. But lo and behold, somebody knows. And I've got a case like that right now. Grow-ups are kind of an interesting thing. I don't know how many here have ever been involved in a grow-up. I'm talking as an agent. Don't, you know. By the way, how many people here are in favor of a registry for grow-ups? How many are against it? Let me explain the reason why. I don't smoke, but that's just me. But I'm not going to put somebody down who has 5 plants for recreational purposes. Under the law, that is a grow-up, and that's not right. It's not right. There's a difference between a farm and recreational use. And the police chiefs are saying, think about this carefully because you're going to stigmatize houses where all, so I turn around, John, I love you. I've got 4 or 5 plants here, man. Give me $10. It's yours. I just did it's a felony. But technically, and it really, what has it done to the house? Nothing. So that's why they don't want to do it. It's the degree of how much marijuana is being grown in the house. And that's fair. I understand when the one I'm dealing with right now, 157 plants. 157 plants. I won't give you the address. The plants are gone, folks. Sorry. With that said, here's something that's very interesting and why also this didn't show up. This is from Maria. Aria, when their pamphlet about grow-ups, says, the best defense, as always, is to disclose everything. That is about everything you ever have to disclose. Be it somebody dumps an old thing in the back of somebody's property, be it somebody poured gasoline down a sewer and it came up through the neighbor's floor. Disclose, disclose. I go to court. Woman says, she's an agent, says, I didn't know the house had urea formaldehyde. I go into court, and I'm the witness, and I go, 3 listings, last 10 years, UFES, 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 past listings. How many of you don't know, this is rhetorical, don't answer. How many of you don't check how far back? You should always look and see how far back those listings go, because you have to know that. So here's what you do. We have a grow-up for sale. It's sold as of last night. Thank God it's sold. Anyways, here's the deal. You walk into the grow-up, the former grow-up. How do my clients know? My clients spent $50,000, bought a house, renovated it, happy for their dream house. Immigrant family, worked hard to get the money to buy this house, and the neighbor told them. They had no idea. Now there's a lawsuit. We come along, a fella that took the listing asked me to get involved, and what I said is, we have to draw this. You walk into the house, it just says, the history of this house. And it says, in 2005, the police, we understand, we put everything we understood out there. Here's the thing, please have this attached to the agreement of purchase and sale and initialed. You got to disclose everything because we have some problems. Which leads me to the flood. Now, who's from Ottawa in this room? Canada, flooding? Okay. Do you have to disclose it? Okay. So Canada, I've looked at it, I've studied it. The thing is, though, the houses that are affected aren't the most expensive homes in the world. Am I correct? Yes. Okay. So the stigma factor there isn't phenomenal, but it's there. There is a case where the agent had in the counter, she had disclosures on a flood. What happened is the selling agent didn't give it to her buyer. So they came to me, the lawyers, and I said, the listing agent did exemplary work. The selling agent, throw her to the curb. So you've got to be very careful. Why she didn't think it was that important. By the way, why I mentioned Canada? Because Canada's flooding has been in the papers so many times, and on the news, it is a lot of media on that particular flooding. Now, I'll tell you this, it's very interesting. When I go into some areas and the lawyers phone me and say, Barry, can you go check this out? What do you think? What's the stigma? What's going on? I go there, one case where the houses have cracks in the foundations. In one house I was in, it had been built in Mississauga over a former garbage dump that people didn't disclose. Underneath the foundation, there was a gap of almost 15 feet. The only thing holding the house up were the footings. If the gas had pulled away, they had to shut off the gas. I started talking to neighbors with huge cracks in their foundation. No, we have nothing. Nothing's wrong with their house. Don't talk. Their house is fine. People don't want to disclose that. In Oshawa right now, I'm dealing with a flooding situation. With that said, now, this is the one that everybody gets fascinated about. Murder. Murder. I mean, who's from Hamilton? I'm teaching. I've been all over the province. I'm in Toronto. You go, okay, who's ever done a house with a murder? Hand goes up. Hamilton. Half the class. So I said, in a joke, multiple murders, half the class. I couldn't believe it. But that was only up the mountain. You should see what goes on in the city. What happens is, so murder, now I want to tell you something about murder is defined. That's all there is to it. There's been a murder in the house. Now, I'm going to get into the SPIS in a few minutes, and I'll tell you why I think it's a piece of crap. And I'll tell you, I mean, I've got an opinion on it. Anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my questions that you should ask a seller. The questions you ask a seller. So suicide, I want you to be very careful about suicide. There is a broker of record who is a lot of you, I know people in this room, he called me, a broker of record, you work in a firm. He said, Barry, what are we going to do? It was a final inspection, and as my agent's outside by himself waiting, the neighbor says to him, did you tell him about the suicide? He says, we never heard about it. What are we going to do? I said, well, first you got to confront the seller and say, what's going on? You've got a real problem. If you want a stigma, what if the family doesn't want the stigma of some person in their family being labeled a suicide? So what I have had to do as an agent is I will say to someone, I know there's been an unnatural death in the house. I don't have the details because sometimes the families won't talk. But you can't go because a neighbor down the street said something. But here's the thing, can you go with rumor? Can you go with innuendo? And the answer is absolutely not. You have to go back to your seller. Now, which brings me to Royal LePage. So Royal LePage calls me in for one of their agents is being sued. I sit down with this agent, and he doesn't speak English well. And we go through a thing, and I start saying to him, wow, your notes are amazing. He had everything that he did in his process written down. I said, but I'm going to play advocate here. So you, after the fact, you made up your notes. This little man looks at me, smiles, and takes it and says, look at every deal I've ever been involved. He writes everything down. The man was foolproof. You couldn't sue this guy. I loved what this man did. He makes notes of everything. If you go back, say, neighbor said, write it down. If you, and have a diary, put it in your smartphone, whatever, write it down. Confronted seller. Seller refuses to discuss. Seller won't discuss. Blah, blah, blah. And you have to at least write it down. So with that said, now, Bob Aaron writes about this. Here's a house, the Massey house. Anybody remember this article? Bob Aaron writes an article basically about a house that had a murder in it in I think it's 1907. Do you have to disclose a murder that happened in 1907? Ladies and gentlemen, if it happened in 1807, you got to disclose it if you know about it. That's what's the problem in this province. Quebec is the only province in Canada with a ruling on disclosure about murder. California, 3 years, it's off the books. You have to mandatory disclose it for 3 years, which is also a bunch of crap too, because here's the other thing. In Ontario, I'll back it up. 33 states, the United States, make mandatory disclosure on the seller. We don't have it. We are the targets. It's on us to play real estate detective. Am I scaring anybody yet so far? Okay. So with that said, you've got to think. A lawyer tells you, I don't want you to disclose that. The lawyer is wrong. You are obligated by law in the province of Ontario to disclose it as a realtor. Pardon me, as a registrant. We don't have to be realtors. So with that said, we can't take an unlawful instruction. You tell the lawyer, you're wrong, I have to. I have no choice. Because let's talk about my favorite one. This piece of crap called the SPIS. What they do with the SPIS is you're asking someone to know everything about a house from day one. In the meantime, if we look, the house has turned over 17 times since 1960. We had a downturn in the 70s. I should know I owned houses. We had a downturn in the 80s. I know I owned houses. We had a downturn in the 90s. I owned even more houses. So we've had downturns. We've had mortgage sales. We've had chains where the owners weren't there. You bought it from the banks or whatever as is. How do you know? But there's always one little old neighbor who peeks out of the drapes. They know. They know. They know everything about this. So the SPIS. So I come to this, and I don't want to step on any toes. Is there anybody here from that particular office? Okay, good. So, because it was a RE/MAX case. The Krawchuk case is probably the single most significant case that has happened to us as realtors in years, because the courts have finally decided how to deal with this. So let's look at this for a minute. By the way, what's the first rule of taking a listing? Google it. Yahoo, Google, and every other search engine you can think of. This is a street, 117 Melville Avenue. Sorry, significant. It's public knowledge. I found it. First thing it does, it shows a map. Can you read this? Man found in basement. Now Toronto's fourth. It was a homicide. There's a whole list on Google about how can you go to court and say, I didn't know. I didn't know. I got houses with all kinds of problems going on with them, and I went on to Google and I found them in 2.5 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. There it was. Seconds. What are we talking minutes? And yet the agents are going, I didn't know. I got one right now. I got to really look out here. I had to watch who's in the audience. I got one where an agent swears under oath that he did not know. He did not know it was a grow-up when he sold the house. He also had sold the house to a Chinese investor years earlier who never had been here. He was property managing it for the investor. And we have the police report under the Privacy Act. We requested a Freedom of Information Act. Guess who signed the thing that he's the one that called the cops? The guy who didn't know. So that's a good one. So let's look at the real estate police. The real estate police, or as we call them affectionately, RICO. I got to be careful. I actually sit on a committee in RICO, so at least I did till an hour ago. Okay, so RICO. Look what we've got to do. You've all seen this. I'm not going to read this to you. We got to be fair and honest. God, did they ever teach that at RIA? Best interests. We got to inaccurate representations. Well, that could be pretty innocent. Error, misrepresentation, and fraud. The case that I'm finishing up on the weekend, I've got to finish my last written report that I'm working on. And what I'm going to do is, I got a problem. They are also charging the agent with fraud. So I've got a problem. I had to pull myself back because it's a lawyer's position to deal with fraud. I don't want to. With that said, this is where it gets real tricky. This is the one I really want to read to you. I know you've read it. This is the catch-all of all. Read this. It's the same one. Material fact. I don't care what province you're in. It's almost the same in every province. A broker or salesperson has a customer or a client in relation to acquisition, disposition, blah, 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 shall at the earliest practical opportunity disclose to the customer or the client the material facts relating to the acquisition or disposition that are known, and I love this, by or ought to be known. Would you let me please explain what ought to be known is? Now, let me ask you a story. Let me ask you a question, I can tell you a story. Hi, excuse me, I got the house next door. Do you know anything about it? Oh, okay. 2 houses over, 3 houses over, 4 blocks over, 10 blocks over? What's my duty? Where is it defined? Because I don't know. This tells us that we have to be real estate detectives. Believe me, I've been to RICO. Believe me, I've sat down with them and I've gone over this, and they go, but we didn't create the legislation. We only enforce it. It's from the government. And it's unbelievable. Would someone please tell this innocent guy here that's an active real estate agent what I have to do with this? Am I to knock doors and find the old biddy who looks through the blinds? Am I supposed to find the old biddy? But I'll tell you this, I will Google, and I will make a few other things. So we're coming back to some of the questions in a minute. Now, the Krawcheck case. Now, the Krawcheck versus Sherbrooke, it's a wonderful case study. Here's the deal. I'm going to have to look at this. This was a very basic home, $110,000. Mind you, I've been to Sudbury. No, $110,000. It was one of ours. It was Remax Sudbury, sold the house. The seller filled in an SPIS. The seller said the plumbing was good. He also said that there had been settlement in the house 17 years earlier. That wasn't true. The house was still settling quite a bit. Without going through every bit of it, the house had settled so much that when the judge in the first case found what had gone on, they awarded the buyer, Krawcheck, $110,000, the purchase price, and the title insurance gave him $105,000. But the agent was let out. They didn't like that. They felt they'd been lied to. They took it to the Court of Appeal. Now, the Court of Appeal has 3 judges. The judges unanimously decided against the real estate agent because they said in their decision, the duty of a real estate agent is to verify information provided by the vendor about the property. We can't take their word. It doesn't mean anything. We have to look. The agent should have inquired about the settlement. The agent should have recommended a home inspector, which they didn't, because he was dual agent. The agent had to inform the sellers about their role of lying when they filled out the SPIS form. And the agent ended up being found liable for half of $110,000 plus $25,000 in costs. Would you want to be that agent? There's a very famous case in Sydney, Australia, where the agents are all over. They didn't disclose one of the most notorious murders in all of Australia. A lot of us get Merv's comments. Merv sent me this case. And it's fascinating because it's called the Hooker Company. Here I am standing here in Canada about 7 or 8 years later. It's all over the internet. Who needs their name out there? Who needs me speaking the ill of a company that happened? But it's public knowledge. Who needs it? You don't want it. If you're a broker of record or a manager in this room today, I'd suggest that you really look at some of the policies in your office because you've got to be careful. You don't want to be named. Here's what your action plan is. You've got to investigate every listing. First, go back into MLS constantly. Go backwards into MLS. Go as far back as you can. Look at every expired everything. Check the comments. Next thing, research it. Google each home. I use the SPIS. I never get it signed. Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, have you? Check, check, check. It's for me. I keep it, but it's all crap. There's only 3 things you got to ask people. 4, as a matter of fact. Somebody suggested in one of my seminars, I got asked 4 questions. Number 1, is there anything in this structure that a potential buyer should know that would cause a problem with the house, or whatever you want to say? 2, is there anything in the land that a potential buyer should know? 3, is there anything in the neighborhood, pending or otherwise? And I'm talking as someone, as a father, my kids were young, we bought a house and found out we were 2 doors over from a convicted pedophile, which I didn't know. And 4, is there anything you could tell me that will negate getting insurance on this house? That's the 4th question, I think, is a very important one. Can you get insurance on the house? I got a house right now, it's had 7 floods in Lower Etobicoke. 7 floods. You know what my market value of the house is? 0. Because even if you tore the house down, you still got a flooded lot. 7 floods. Next, take longer listings if you've got. I've got this. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know if I'll ever list another former grow-up. I don't know if I'll ever list one. I will if it's a piece of garbage, because then you can tear the house down. That's different. Land value? Absolutely. I'll say this to you. We've sold the house 3 times. Each time the buyer has backed out. So it's been a real, my time's worth more, sorry. Do not fall in the trap of marketing a hard one. I don't know about your office, but where I am, Tim Sirianis, my broker, doesn't have an award for the most dramatic performance in real estate. We don't have that. I wish we did, because a lot of people would fight to get that one. Don't commit to expensive advertising, which is about any kind of advertising you can do. I always joke, those of us in Toronto, if you have a purebred dog and it escapes and you can't find it, it is cheaper to buy a new purebred dog than to put one lousy ad in the Toronto Star. Reduce, reduce, reduce. If you've got a stubborn seller, you don't need it. Folks, don't take them. Don't cut your commission, but most important, disclose, okay? SPIS, this is what Gloria Epstein, I've been in front of Judge Epstein more than once. Judge Epstein says in one of her cases, the SPIS form seems to present a ground ripe for litigation. Remember AREA was pushing us to do the SPIS? Guess what? AREA was wrong, which is not the first time. Would you disclose? Look at all this stuff. Pedophiles, halfway houses, power corridors, as if anybody can't see a power corridor. Murders, suicide, grow-ops, contamination, mold, health issues, termite. How about erosion? How about expropriation coming up? All kinds of stuff. There's a list. And here's where the rub is. You can't put a Band-Aid over it. I got a guy, they had problems. Oh, what they did to patch this house, they took masking tape and put drywall compound over masking tape. I mean, you can't do that crap. You can't be this ignorant either. By the way, this is a myth that they don't do that, but it looks good when I do a slide. Okay. You can't do this either. And this is here's where the real thing is. All of us in this province that are under REBA 2002 The question for everybody here is, how long is disclosure? This is the dumbest piece of legislation I've ever seen in my entire life. I am obsessed with this. I am more than obsessed with this. I'm waiting for a government to finally get a government in Ontario that stabilizes. And what I want to do is I want to sit down with, because they got all kinds of other things. I mean, they've got to give money, vouchers to people getting food that, you know. Anyway, I won't start with that. What happens is we don't have a stable government. I'm going to be pushing that we have to have some statute of limitation on disclosure in the province of Ontario. This is ludicrous. Because think about this. It's not on your seller to be mandatory to disclose, but it's on us under REBA 2002 that we have to. Who the hell wrote this piece of legislation? What genius came up with this? In the United States, it's the law that the sellers have to. There's something wrong. And we should, I've tried to go to AREA and say, we have to champion this. That's what I got. Sorry if anybody is active in AREA. With that said, when in doubt, disclose unto others. Okay? Now, I'm going to be opening up in a minute for time, for questions. We don't have that much time left. This is not where you want to find yourself. I had a comment in here when we were just starting. Somebody told me that they just sued for their commission. They won the case, thankfully. It took them over 2 years. I don't know who of you have been involved in litigation here. I don't want to know. But those of you that have, you got to give about 2 years, 3 years of your life. I've got cases that go 10 years. What happens? People fire their lawyers. There's things happen. They screw it up. It gets twisted around. Don't ask. So why would you want to get involved with this stuff? I'm going to ask if anybody wants. I don't do nonsense on my professional page. On my personal page, I do crap. I mean, I don't know how many of you saw me lose my head, but you know, I do things. This is my professional page. That's me when I was a broker in a certain year. And on my professional page, I talk about agency. I'm not going to tell you what company I was with, but they were lousy gold jackets. Absolute true story. I'm in a gold jacket. I'm at a convention. I was one of the first Century 21 brokers in Ontario. And I was the first one out, by the way. With that said, I'm at the Prince Hotel. Couple walks over. Y'all got a table? 2 Americans. I'm in the breakfast area. I'm there. I just grab 2 menus. I take them over, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be chauvinistic here. And I take them over to the table. I sit them down. The girl's looking at me. I says, excuse me, Maria, is this your station? And she goes, would you look at, where are you from? These nice people from Dallas? I never wear the damn gold jacket again. And that's about it. Now, I'm open for questions. I'm open for observations. Question.
Do you think our responsibility of due diligence extends to title search in advance of listing?
I always try to title search. I'll tell you something. I have never taken a listing personally in 46 years, unless it's a subdivision listing that I haven't gone down and walked into the zoning office, which in Toronto is a pain in the butt. I go to the zoning office. By the way, that's a very good question. Did everybody hear her question? Okay. Do you search title every time? My thing is, the only comment I got back that's a negative is, I may not be skilled enough to read the title. But I ask people when I get there, can I please have the deed? Can I come to your house? Can I have your deed? Most people don't know where it is, but if they have it, I do. I'm looking for rights of ways and easements and stuff like that. Absolutely. Other question. Over here, please. Back here. Well, that's when someone kills themselves. sorry. It's my sense of humor. Yeah. Yeah, you've got to go back, and here's what's happened. There's been a study. As a matter of fact, in my longer course, I have a 3-hour course that I have called Selling the Haunted House. And it's in there about suicide. What happens with suicide? The question is, what do you do if you hear from the neighbor, but the family doesn't want to disclose? You have to sit and explain, we've heard that there's been a suicide, and if someone buys this house and they hear from the neighbor like I just did, we're all going to be in a lawsuit. Do you really want to be in a lawsuit for non-disclosure? And that's how you have to address it. You have to be aggressive to go forward with it. Question here.
Well, I had that same thing happen, and it was a judge who was selling the house.
The judge was selling the house?
And I said, did you know that there was another, he didn't disclose it to me. And I said, did you know that there was someone that had committed suicide? He goes, yes. And I said, you didn't tell me about it, like I need to know. And anyway, the long and the short of it is, I have a choice to tell you, and also I have a choice to tell you whether you can tell the next person or not. I contacted Rico. Rico said, you have to have instructions from your seller. If your seller asks you not to disclose, then you do not disclose. So you're in a box. I just said no to the listing. But unfortunately, I got an offer, which I had to tell them about, and then that opened up that whole can.
All right, here's what's happened. If you've got someone who tells you we do not want this disclosed, Rico may come out, but here's the thing. A lawyer is going to sue later. It doesn't matter win or lose. You're going to be sued. Even if you lose, if you win it, you're still going to have time tab. Hold on, I got a couple of more. Let me get a couple of questions, and I'll hang around. Go ahead, back here.
I was wondering
Lights are bright.
how you feel about, I don't believe in the SPIS, and on our board, it's mandatory. So my seller just fills out in the note section that she or he is not an expert in mechanical, structure, or electrical. Please have a home inspection and sign. And I also recommend
That's
to
good.
all of my sellers that they get a free home inspection done, and we provide that in favor of the SPIS. What's your feeling about the home inspection in favor of an SPIS?
Not if it's a grow up, by the way. I'll go one step further. I agree with everything you just said. If it's a grow up, you have to get a mold report to go with it.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'll come back. Go ahead, John.
Specifically murder.
Murder?
Does there have to be a conviction for there to be a murder?
It could be a murder. Doesn't they never?
No, but does it have to be a conviction?
No. What if you know they never find the killer?
On the knife. You know what I'm trying to say?
But there was still an unnatural death.
Unnatural death.
I tried that, but we ended up with a divorce lawyer instead. It was. It was. Sorry. Go ahead. Natural death. I was waiting for that. There is nothing natural death. When my late mother was passing away, I'm sure I'm hitting a nerve here with people. Sunnybrook turns and said, "Would you like her to be home with all her loved ones?" I said, "Would you like to keep your stats down?" I said, "No." Today, sending people home to die. Here's the question for a house that's over 50 years old. It's not who's died in a house, it's how many. It's natural. It's natural. Question here, and then we're good. That's your last question. Last question.
Classified case, one of the owners fell from the stairs, but he later died in the hospital.
He didn't die in the house. I joke about the guy drops off the 20th floor. He didn't kill him. He died down below. Okay, very last question.
I have one question. I have a listing where one of the sellers committed suicide in a garage.
Yeah.
Unsuccessful. His wife found him. They brought him to hospital, and he passed in the hospital 12 hours later.
You can argue it. You can argue it. By the way, it's always the garage. Always the garage. Okay, folks, have a great what's left to Kickstart.